All right, ladies and gentlemen, today we'll be talking about chapters 21 and 22 of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. As we come to this point in the text, the monster, of course, has made his request to Victor. I demand that you make a mate for me, a bride of Frankenstein, a female monster that he can live with, because mankind has rejected him. The monster at this point in the text realizes, after he finishes his narration in 16, that no one will accept him. If DeLacy and his family won't accept him, he is truly alone. And what the monster wants the most is companionship. He wants a mate. And Victor does initially agree. He starts to build that second monster. But as we saw in chapters 19, 20, when he sees, of course, the monster in the reflection in the window, he can't bring himself to do it. He tears the second monster up right in front of the first monster. He's like, I will not do this. I will not consent. At which point, the first monster, of course, makes his famous threat, I will be there on your wedding night. And so Victor Frankenstein now knows that the monster intends to fully exact his revenge by attacking Victor on his wedding night with Elizabeth. And so the monster leaves, and Victor's left with the pieces of this second monster that he was building. And so he jumps into a rowboat, rows out into the middle of this lake to deposit the pieces of the second monster. And as he does so, he gets caught out there at night. He doesn't return till the following morning. And when he returns the following morning, he is greeted by a group of men, including the town magistrate, who arrest him. And of course, we're left at the end of chapter 20 wondering what has happened. Why is Victor Frankenstein being arrested? And that brings us here into chapter 21. In chapter 21, we learn very quickly what has happened here. About a half a dozen men came forward, and one being selected by the magistrate, he deposed that he had been out fishing the night before with his son and brother-in-law, Daniel Nugent, when, about 10 o'clock, they observed a strong northerly blast rising, and they accordingly put in for port. It was a very dark night, as the moon had not yet risen. They did not land at the harbor, but as they had been accustomed, at a creek about 2 miles below. He walked on first, carrying a part of a fishing tackle, and his companions followed him at some distance. As he was proceeding along the sands, he struck his foot against something and fell at his length on the ground. His companions came to assist him, and by the light of their lantern they had found that he had fallen on the body of a man, who was to all appearance dead. Their first supposition was that this was the corpse of some person who had drowned and was thrown on shore by the waves, but on examination they found that the clothes were not yet wet, and even then the body was not then cold. They instantly carried it to the cottage of an old woman near the spot and endeavored, but in vain, to restore it to life. It appeared to be a handsome young man, about 25 years of age. He had apparently been strangled, for there was no sign of any violence except for the black mark of fingers on his neck. So, obviously, Victor is being arrested for murder here. Sometime over the course of the night, while he was out deposing of the pieces of the second monster, dropping them into that lake, someone has been murdered on the shore right where he had left off. A young man, about 25 years old, they notice that it has been strangled. And, Victor initially doesn't respond to it, but when the mark of the fingers was mentioned, I remember the murder of my brother and felt extremely agitated. My limbs trembled and a mist came over my eyes, which obliged me to lean on a chair for support. When Victor hears that the person who has been murdered was strangled, he realizes instantly this must have been my monster. The monster murders people by strangling them. And Victor reacts to it. He leans on this chair for support, and the magistrate sees this. And he's like, okay, wait, this guy looks guilty. He's reacting to this. Notice as well that, again, we get this reference to Victor being blinded. A mist came over my eyes. Throughout this text, there's numerous moments where Victor describes his vision being obscured. There was a barrier between me and them sealed in the blood of William and Justine, or I felt like a film had been taken from before my eyes, or a mist came over my eyes. Mary Shelley employs this repetitive use of this obscuring vision thing to reestablish the idea that Victor is an unreliable narration. And there's more examples of this in chapter 21 as we move forward. And so the beginning paragraphs here of chapter 21 the beginning paragraphs here are a series of testimonies. People being called forward to testify to what they saw. Someone testifies the fact that they had seen Victor push off in a boat the night before the murder or the night of the murder. He was at the lake. So everyone kind of testifies that someone was murdered and Victor was in the area. And so the magistrate decides here that he's going to bring Victor into the room where the body is so that he can observe how Victor reacts when he sees the body. I entered the room where the corpse lay and was led up to the coffin. How can I describe my sensations on beholding it? I feel yet parched with horror, nor can I reflect on that terrible moment without shuddering in agony. The examination, the presence of the magistrate and the witnesses passed like a dream from my memory when I saw the lifeless form of Henry Clerval stretched before me. I gasped for breath, and throwing myself on the body, I exclaimed, "Have my murderous machinations deprived you also, my dearest Henry, of life? 2 I have already destroyed, other victims await their destiny, but you, Clerval, my friend, my benefactor." So Victor's taken into the room, and what does he see but the body of his best friend, 25-year-old Henry Clerval. It's obvious that, Henry Clerval had, if you remember, he and Victor went on this journey, but then they separated. Victor sent Henry to go visit with some friends in another part of Scotland while Victor was working on the second monster. And obviously, Henry Clerval returns the night that Victor rows out into that lake to dispose of the pieces of the second monster. And obviously, the first monster sees Henry, comes across him, and murders him as vengeance for Victor not completing the second monster. And Victor, on seeing this, when he sees the body, Victor blames himself in this language. He's like, "Oh my God, have I killed you too, Henry? 2 others I've already destroyed." He's referring to William and Justine there. But of course, to the magistrate, when Victor is like, "Oh my God, have I killed you too?" it sounds like Victor's confessing to the crime. Victor is, upon seeing the body of his best friend, he is carried out of the room in strong convulsions. Here he has another example of those fits and fevers we were talking about. These moments where Victor seems to pass out, is stretched out on a bed and is rambling, is raving. He's a lunatic. If you remember, he did so in chapter 5 after he returned to his apartment and the monster was gone. A fever succeeded to this. I lay for 2 months on the point of death. And so after finding the body of Henry Clerval, Victor passes out, is carried into this cabin, and is basically laid out for 2 months. 2 months. My ravings, as I afterwards heard, were frightful. I called myself the murderer of William and of Justine and of Clerval. Sometimes I entreated my attendants to assist me in the destruction of the fiend to whom I was tormented, and at others I felt the fingers of the monster already grasping my neck. Here is Victor. He is now arrested. They put him in this cell, to keep an eye on him. And Victor, for 2 months, is in the cell. The nurses will come by to check on him, to feed him. And he's stark raving mad. He'll grab the nurse and be like, "Help me. Help me. There's a monster out there. I created a monster. It's alive. We have to go kill it. Help me. Get me out of here. My other family, got to protect Alphonse." You got to imagine for 2 months. There's times as well where he hallucinates, where he will be lying in the cell while the magistrate is watching, and Victor will thrash on his bed and cry out, "The monster's strangling me. Help me. Help me." And of course, there's no one there with him. Here is a great example of our unreliable narration. Victor's a madman. He's lost his mind. He admits, both in chapter 5 and here, he admits to hallucinating. He's like, "I felt the fingers already grasping my neck and screamed aloud with agony." He's in the jail cell. The monster's not there. He's hallucinating here. His guilt over all of this is causing him to hallucinate, which begs the question. Now that we've established that Victor has a history of hallucination, what else is he hallucinating in this text? A question you should be asking yourself. But as Victor realizes here, "But I was doomed to live. And in 2 months found myself as waking from a dream." There's the dream reference again. As if all this was surreal, as if all this was a dream to him. "In a prison stretched on a wretched bed, surrounded by gaolers, turnkeys, bolts, and all the miserable apparatus of a dungeon. So after 2 months of being raving mad, Victor's chained up in a dungeon. Let's see here. But when I looked around, I saw the barred windows and the squalidness of the room I was in, and I groaned bitterly. Victor is jailed here. And as he is jailed, awaiting trial, he is taken care of. Let's see here. Yeah, he is taken care of. Let's see here. Where is it? Let's see here. Here we go. Victor, he has these people taking care of him. And he has this woman who speaks kind of rudely to him. And Victor here, I turn with loathing from the woman who could utter so unfeeling a speech to a person just saved on the very edge of death. But I felt languid and unable to reflect on all that had passed. The whole series of my life appeared to me as a dream. I sometimes doubted if indeed it were all true, for it never presented itself to my mind with the force of reality. That line right there. Victor here, in telling the story to Walton, as he reflects back at the end of his life, he's like, Robert, after seeing the death of so many of my friends, seeing the death of William, of Justine, and of Henry, in that moment, as I look back on it, my life felt like a dream, like it wasn't real, like I wasn't really living this. And I indeed doubted if it were all true. I doubt, Henry, that all this were true because it never presented itself to my mind with the force of reality. It doesn't feel real to me. Think about that. That is our narrator, Victor Frankenstein, saying to us here in chapter 21, all of this stuff seems kind of fantastical, and sometimes I doubted if any of it were real. More unreliable narration there. Okay. So Victor struggles throughout this chapter, struggles greatly with his own sanity. Let's see here. Again, the past appeared to me in the light of a frightful dream, yet the vessel in which I was, the wind blew me from the detested shore of Ireland. Victor eventually is put on trial, but they're able to prove that Victor, there's not enough evidence to convict Victor. He is acquitted. No one actually, Kerwin and them, they don't actually believe that Victor committed this murder. And obviously Victor being delirious supports that. And so eventually Victor is released. His father comes to get him. And he is able to head home. In the last paragraph of 21, Victor admits to us, last paragraph here of 21, ever since my recovery of the fever, I have been in the custom of taking every night a small quantity of laudanum. Laudanum is a drug. Laudanum is an opiate. It's the type of drug that you would take that would, suppress certain feelings. It is an opiate. Laudanum is something that would make you hallucinate. So it's not surprising that we've got references throughout this text of Victor hallucinating and then telling us right here at the end of 21, oh, by the way, I've been taking laudanum for a while. I've been taking an opiate that makes me hallucinate, which might reinforce why Victor is hallucinating in the first place. He's on a drug that makes you hallucinate. And I want to point out a couple things about laudanum. First of all, it was very common during this time, if people were depressed, it was very common that they would prescribe them laudanum. And so when we think about a lot of these romantic writers, people like William Blake, people like Samuel Taylor Coleridge, many of them, Lord Byron, they were all using laudanum. Basically at the time, if you were feeling down or depressed, a doctor's prescription to you would be, here's some drugs, get high, you'll feel better. And so we know that summer of 1816, when Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, John Polidori gather in Geneva, Switzerland, Claire Claremont's with them as well. When they gather in Geneva, Switzerland, we know that they are high on drugs. They're doing drugs, reading these old German ghost stories. And remember, Mary Shelley, on the influence of drugs, has that waking dream or hallucination that inspires this novel. So, of course, she's going to have her main character also hallucinating, also on laudanum. So, yeah, Victor's on laudanum here. which reinforces this idea that he's unreliable. But this is how he's dealing with his depression. And it's not that much of an inference to assume. If laudanum was given, think about this. If laudanum is given to someone who's depressed, at which moment in the text is Victor most depressed? Obviously, chapter 3 with his mother. So think about it. His mother dies. He heads off to college. And because he is depressed and alone at college, they probably prescribed him laudanum. So they give him laudanum, and then all of a sudden he creates a monster that no one else in the text seems to see. That 6 years later happens to appear outside his house and starts murdering people. You have to question Victor's reliability in this narration. That brings us to chapter 22. In chapter 22, Victor is finally brought home by his father. He receives a letter from Elizabeth, who asks the same question his father asked earlier. Victor, is it possible you don't want to marry me? Like, why are you always away from me? Why don't you come home? And Victor realizes he really has no choice now but to go and marry Elizabeth. Like, he has no excuse not to at this point, other than the fact that he knows, as he says here, the monster's request, I will be there on your wedding night. And so, Victor is now planning a wedding in this chapter. They're planning a wedding in 22 and a honeymoon. And imagine being Victor right now, planning a wedding, knowing full well that the wedding night you're going to be attacked by a monster of your own creation. And so 22, Victor starts to prepare. He gets a knife and a gun. He's carrying a gun around with him. That's probably what Elizabeth wants, her soon-to-be husband carrying a pistol with him all the time and looking agitated. But they do. They have the wedding, and they head off on their honeymoon. And, of course, this for Elizabeth is going to be the happiest day of her life, the day where she gets to marry, her childhood brother / lover or whatever. It's going to be the greatest day of her life. And she has no idea that Victor is preparing here for battle, that he is expecting to be attacked by the monster on this wedding night. And that's a scene that we will see when we get to chapter 23, and we start to wrap this thing up during our next video. I hope this video finds you well. Email me if you have any questions, and I'll talk to you later.